shame into glory. You're the only one who came. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can.
Good morning, Crossroads. How we doing?
Grace, what have you done? Murdered for me on that cross, accused in absence of wrong. My sin washed away in your blood. So much to make sense of it all. Know that your love breaks my fall. Scandal of grace, you died in my place, so my soul will live. Oh, to be just to know you, Jesus, there's no one beside you. Forever the hope in my heart. Death, where is your sting? Your power is as dead as my sin. Taught me to live. Mercy, my heart now to sing. The day and its trouble shall come. I know that your strength is enough. The scandal of grace, you died in my place, so my soul will. Just to know you, Jesus, there's no one beside you. Forever the hope in my heart. Oh, to be like you. to know Jesus, there's no one beside you. Forever the hope in my heart.
Hello, Crossroads. Everybody say hi to your neighbor. Say what's up.
Hey.
Fist bump, all that good stuff.
I'm gonna find my way, not trip. It's my turn. Good morning, Crossroads. We're so excited to see you this morning. Thank you for choosing to join us for worship. My name is Meredith. I'm the operations director here, and I just want to welcome you and let any guests that we have in the room or online know that you can text the number on the screen. You can text welcome to that number, and it just lets us say thank you for coming. We have a special gift for you in guest services. Anybody wearing a shirt like I have can get that for you. We just want you to feel welcome and know that you are free to worship with us as you feel comfortable. So I have a couple of announcements for us. I want to share. You guys can have a seat for me. One of the things as we're going to get through Thanksgiving first, of course. I'm a no Christmas till after Thanksgiving kind of person. So I know we have both sides, right? But I want to tell you what's coming for Christmas. How about that? Can we do that? All right, cool. So starting next week, you can start bringing back the items from our Christmas project this year. So we have a local serve project with the Texas Baptist Children's Home, and we are sponsoring a couple of their cottages. Now, each of their cottages has 5 to 6 families, which is a single mom and her kids. And so they have made a request list, and that's what's on our trees that are in the back, or there is a list online of what's on these trees. So if you would help us out, we would love to provide all of these things from the board in the back. If you'll pick one of these up, sign it out, and then bring it back by December the 12th. We're excited to get to provide these things for those families. The other option, other than just the cottages, there's a couple of them. I think there's about 6 or 7 of them in there that are family experiences. So it lets that single mom take her kids out to the Thinkery or the zoo, or something like that, and just have special time to make memories with her kids. So we want to help do that for them. If you have any questions, you can contact our children's coordinator, Melanie, or myself at any point. So that is a big deal coming up for Christmas. Make sure you read the rest of what's in your bulletin today, as there's Kids Nativity coming up. We need to know if your kids want to be involved in that. That's always a fun feature here at Crossroads, and so we'll see them up here in a couple of weeks. And then Christmas Eve, that is our big deal this year too, and we need you to go ahead and RSVP just so we make sure we have enough food. But we'll be at the Oasis, just as a different venue for us. Great views of Lake Travis, and just a special time of celebration for Christmas Eve with us. That'll be at 12:30 on Christmas Eve. So I know that was a lot. You can do it. It's all in here for you. Let me pray as we go back to worship. Father, we just thank you for today. We thank you that you have just given us the freedom to be able to come and praise you and worship you. We thank you for each person that has come. We just pray for open hearts as Pastor Brady brings the word. And Lord, we just sit in silence in just a moment to reflect on your greatness. Thank you, Lord. In your name we pray.
See what God has done. See what God has done for every daughter and every son. Oh, come on and hear what God has done. For everyone who fears the Lord will sing of what He has done. And all the earth will shout your every daughter and every son. Oh, come home and hear what God has done for everyone who fears the Lord will sing of what He's done. And all the earth will shout your praise, and all the earth will sing your name, for you are great, for you are great. And all the earth will shout your praise, and all the earth will sing your name, for you are great, for you are great. How glorious your name, how awesome are your ways, for you are great, for you are great. Oh, come home and see what God has done. Oh, see what God has done for every daughter and every son. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord, and it's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, we pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord, and it's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, we pour out our praise. It's your breath All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath
Father, we just thank you for this morning. I thank you for these people, and that whatever you have for us this week, that you would just speak it to us, we would hear you clearly and understand you. And I pray blessings over the pastor as he comes, what he's prepared, and what he's heard through the week, Father, that he brings it, and that your people receive it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Well, thanks, Cameron and team, for leading us in worship this morning. How we doing, everybody? Yeah, it's so good to see you. Well, if you could choose success or failure this morning, what would you choose? Success or failure, what would you choose? Now, I think I know the answer to that, right? Every single one of us are going, I would choose success. But think about what you're working on right now. Maybe it's a project at work. Maybe it's a paper for school. Maybe it's a goal on a team. Maybe it's a goal in your organization, something that you want to achieve, something you want to conquer, something that you want to have some success with. Will you have failure or success? You know what? Experts tell us that we actually learn more from our failures than our successes. Anybody like that? No, I don't either, right? It sounds great, but it doesn't feel very good. And in fact, it makes learning way overrated at that point. Just saying, right? Truth is, we may not learn a lot through our success, but at the same time, I'm not anti-success. We all want to be successful. In fact, think about this. If you know J.K. Rowling, she wrote what? Harry Potter, right? Just a quote from her this morning. I'll just give you this. She said, I had failed on an epic scale. I was an exceptionally short-lived marriage. After my exceptionally short-lived marriage had imploded, and I was jobless, a lone parent, and as I was as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless, the fears that my parents had for me, that I had for myself, had both come to pass. And by every usual standard, I was the biggest failure I knew. How about Steve Jobs? Steve Jobs was fired from the very company that he first founded. The list goes on. Bill Gates, a Harvard dropout whose first company failed. Abraham Lincoln, 1831, what happened? He had a failed business. 1836, he has a nervous breakdown in light of his failed business. 1856, though, he's back at it, but he's defeated in his presidential run. Just a few years later, 5 years later, in 1861, he becomes the 16th president of the United States. How about Walt Disney? He was fired from his first job at a newspaper company because he was not creative enough. And then his second business, or really his first entrepreneurial business that he launched, failed too because of other endeavors of not being creative enough. Now, I think about that. Without the right perspective, success, all right, if we're not careful, the flip side of that can defeat us, right? We learn a lot through our failures. It was Henry Ford who said, failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. Right? Think through that. Now, why do I start with that this morning? I start with that this morning because I think the greatest threat to your future, maybe our future, may be our current success. Where are you winning right now? Where are things good and gravy-like and they're wonderful and you're having tremendous success? It could be potentially the greatest threat to your future. Now, the reason this is so important is because no matter what life throws at you, no matter what life throws at me, we all want to finish strong. I think we want to finish strong with our integrity. We don't want to fall to the wayside of our arrogance. We don't want to fall to our pride, the things that we struggle with. And as we've looked at these past weeks, we've looked at the story of Gideon. We've looked at really almost 100 verses in chapters 6 through 8. When we first meet Gideon, he's timid. In fact, he's hiding in a wine press, threshing wheat so the Midianites can't find him. But an angel of the Lord calls him up, calls him out, and says, Gideon, I want you to lead the army. I want you to be the deliverer as a judge of the Israelite people over the Midianites so they're no longer oppressing you after this 7-year run, right? And what was Gideon? Gideon at that time, he was full of questions, right? Gideon was full of doubts. But then we see him incrementally begin to grow in his faith. Nonetheless, he needs lots of reassurances along the way, but he begins to grow in his faith. He begins to believe in God's promises. And what we found out last week, he eventually leads the Israelite army in victory over Midian, right? And he's been desperate, right? He's been desperate for the confidence that only God could give, because at this point, life had been bigger than Gideon. He was struggling, and he achieved success. We see the success last week. Even with a small army of 300, he begins to win. And what happens is that in this winning, Gideon begins to change. And that's what we're going to see in chapter 8. All right? He's beginning to chase the enemy. And in Judges chapter 8, the story focuses on Gideon's responses to various peoples after he had won the battle. And he tells us how he handled some of the difficult situations. Now, look at chapter 8 here. It should be on the screen here, just a chronology. In chapter 8 seems to be as follows. What we're going to see in verses 4 through 12, that Gideon's pursuit of two kings. There were two kings of Midian, all right, that escaped the battle. They were not slain, all right? They were not killed on the battlefield. Gideon's going to pursue them and follow them. We're going to look at that. We're going to see that Gideon also is disciplining some of the Jews on their journey home because they rejected him, right? They kind of put Gideon out by himself and didn't help out his troops. So he's going to come back and circle around them. And then we're going to see the protest of one of the tribes of Israel because they were frustrated because they didn't get in on some of the spoils. Then we're going to see the slaying of the kings. And then eventually Gideon's going to hang it up and retire, all right? And we're going to talk about all that today. Are you ready? You got your seatbelt? Buckle in. Here we go. We're in Judges chapter 8. We're going to begin in verses 4 and 5. And it says, I'm going to read from up here because if you'll go to the next slide, 4 and 5, this would be great. This is the NIV. I've got the ESV here. It says, Gideon and his 300 men, exhausted, yet keeping up the pursuit, came to the Jordan and crossed it. He said to the men of Succoth, all right? Can we just talk about that's a horrible name, right? I mean, what a misfortunate name. Where are you from? I'm from Succoth, right? That's great. Get your middle school laughs out. This is wonderful. All right, here we go. He says, give my troops some bread. They are worn out, and I am still pursuing Zeba and Zalmunna, right? You're looking for some baby names? Here you go. All right, the kings of Midian. Now, as you look at, you can go back, all right? If you look at verses 4 and 5, right? I don't have my trusty TV here, so you're going to have to help me out here. I apologize for this. What we see is that Gideon showed up. He's exhausted because they're chasing after these kings. They've just fought this mighty battle, and they're really frustrated. But he shows up to this tribe, and he says, hey, will you give me, to the men of Succoth, will you give us some food? And what we're going to see here is these folks are actually going to stiff arm them. Look at verse 6. He goes on, but the officials of Succoth said, do you already have the hands of Zeba and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your troops? In other words, they're going, hey, the custom in the Old Testament was that when you took out an army, you either took off a head or you took off hands as proof that you had obliterated the kings. And these two tribes are saying, hey, these two kings right here, the people of Succoth are saying, these two kings, you don't have their hands or their head in front of you. Why should we help you, right? Why should we go to that next step and help you out? And he begins to grow frustrated at that. We see verse 7. You can go on. Then Gideon replied, just for that. All right, I love that phrase, just for that. You ever said that? Just for that. All right, you're going to pay, right? Remember this. When the Lord has given Zeba and Zalmunna into my hand, I will tear your flesh with these desert thorns and these briars. Gideon, we see right here, gets a little angry, right? He gets a little frustrated because the expectation is that as another tribe of Israel, you would actually help out your brother in need, right? These guys are going to fight. In between them, as they fled to the east, was this community of Succoth, these folks, and they say no. Now, the reason they say no is a couple-fold, is what scholars say, is that they were closer to the Midianites. They lived near the Midianites, and so they were afraid and really doubted if Gideon and his guys would actually get them and be able to slay them. And so they're worried about them coming back and doing harm to them. And as we think about that, it wasn't long ago that Gideon was fearful too. So we can't really rag these guys too much. Here's point number one that I want to give you this morning. Here's the shift I see in Gideon. Without gratitude, achievements can make us prideful. What I want you to see is the shift in Gideon that seems to be, by the end of the chapter, that he begins to grow in his success. And because of his success and his defeat of the Midianites, he's going to get a little prideful. All right? It's easy, we have to admit this, it's easy to forget where we come from. Anybody? It's easy to forget where you come from versus when we're victorious versus when we struggle. Anybody remember college? Right? I remember college. I lived in a cockroach-infested apartment. Anybody have one of those? I don't know what it is about college apartments. And I lived off ramen noodles. Hello? You know what I'm saying? And then one day you get success and you're no longer in that apartment. You're no longer here. You're no longer there. You no longer have to eat ramen. I mean, I never choose 99-cent ramen at H-E-B anymore. Now we go pay for fancy ramen at Michi Ramen and all those places for $15 a bowl, right? It's basically the same. No, it's not the same stuff. Come on, what are we kidding, all right? Right? College days are easy to forget, right? We forget where we come from. Anybody know the term bougie? Right? You familiar with bougie, right? Comes from I believe it's French for bourgeois. Anybody? It means just simply the upper middle class, somewhat wealthy. When people act bougie, they act more wealthy than they really are. Anybody feel me? Okay, any bougie people in the room this morning? Okay, now think about this. What is it about success that brings out pride? When you and I experience success, what brings out our pride? I think about Proverbs 16:18. The writer here says, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall," right? Our pride is what leads us to destruction if not left in check. How many of you remember the Jim Collins book, Good to Great? Anybody read it in here? It was about 20 years ago now. Good to Great. I read that, I devoured that. Great leadership book, great principles. 10 years later, he wrote another book called How the Mighty Fall, where he goes back and studies all these good to great companies that succeeded and just how 10 years later, many of them failed. Why? Because they had pride, because they had some issues with their pride and success. Now, here's what I know. Moral achievements, okay, even like Gideon's here, moral achievements can make us prideful too. In other words, you and I can become spiritual bougie, right? We can become bougie. James chapter 4 says what? God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. And so we've got to keep in check what's in our heart. Gideon was not doing that at this point. And this is how I would close this part right here. Success can feed our pride, or it can grow our gratitude. When you experience success, are you grateful or are you prideful? Are you grateful in the fact that you go, okay, who gave me a leg up? Who gave me experience? Who introduced me? Who helped me? Right? Who encouraged me? Who paid for it? Like, who helped me get to where I'm at? And I have a heart of gratitude. Or do I move towards pride and go, hey, look at me. Look what I did. Look at my success, right? Second point I want to look at this morning is that without grace, right, offenses can embitter us, right? Without grace, certainly of Jesus, but without grace in our life, when people offend us, it can embitter us. And this is what we see happening here in Judges chapter 8. Gideon was offended that these guys didn't help us. And so that he didn't help the Israelites. And so what happens? They become vengeful. And now he has the power as the king, right? Or not as the king, as the acting king, but as this judge to do something about it. Now, this is the interesting thing. Power and success allow us to exact vengeance on people around us. Look at verse 15. It says, and he came to the men, all right? You got verse 15 up there? Can you put that? I got 17. We have 15? Not yet. I'll read 15 here. How about that? Verse 15, it says, and he came to the men of Succoth and said, behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are exhausted? Right? Judges verse 16. And he took the elders of the city, and he took the thorns of the wilderness and the briars, and with them he taught them with them taught the men of Succoth a lesson. In verse 17, keep reading. And he broke down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. I want you to see here, Gideon takes these guys out and he beats them with briars and thistles, right? He embarrasses them. He shames them. He humiliates these Midianite kings. And in verse 20 of chapter 8, it says this. It says, so he said to Jether, his firstborn, rise and kill them. But the young man did not draw his sword, for he was afraid because he was still a young man. The worst of humiliation, all right, the way that Gideon could humiliate these guys the worst was ask his young son to actually take him, someone younger to take their life. But it says he was a young boy. He wasn't in a place where he could do that. And so Gideon ends up having to take these kings' life. What I want you to see is the motivation change. In chapter 8, verse 7, as it starts off in the NIV, it says, just for that, right? Just for the fact that you wouldn't allow us or you wouldn't feed us, this is what I'm going to do to you. So Gideon is no longer motivated by God's call, but he's walking in his own ego. And he says, hey, I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to do something that's really embarrassing and shameful to you. Now, I want you to think about grace, right? Forgiveness. I want you to talk about grace and what embitters you, right? Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15 says this, see to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. All right? Gideon is now bitter. Gideon finds himself in a place where he is frustrated and bitter. How many of you know a friend or have a friend that's really bitter? How many of you have been a person or are in a state where you've been really bitter? Right? You have resentment, you have frustration, and you've grown bitter. This is what we see here. It's much worse than that, right? When we grow bitter, it gets worse than that because we can miss the grace of God. Now, this is something that I have to work on every day in my life, right? This is the thing that is the best thing ever. That is the grace of God. Every single one of us need the gospel, the grace and mercy of Jesus every day. We need it from God and we need it from each other, don't we? And this is so, so important. Bitterness keeps us, if we're not careful, from expressing and experiencing God's grace in our life and certainly in our relationships, right? You see, grace is far better motivator for life than revenge. And we've got to be aware of that. We've got to be understanding of that. We've got to embrace that. Certainly when we've been hurt. Certainly when we have unmet expectation. Because without grace, our tendency is to move towards bitterness. Now let me give you a third point this morning. Without humility, admiration can corrupt us. Right? Without humility, without being humble, the admiration of others can move into our lives and corrupt us. Look at verse 22 of chapter 8. It says, then the men of Israel said to Gideon, Gideon, rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian. All right? Gideon has reached celebrity status. All of Israel standing before him saying, Gideon, we want you to be our king. In fact, we're so in love with you. We're so excited what you've done and how you've delivered us, even with the 300. He's reached celebrity status. We don't want you just to be our king. We want your son to be our king. We want your grandsons, right? We want to set up a dynasty. We want this heredity monarchy to come and be a part that rules us for the days ahead, right? And then verse 23, what do we see in Gideon's response? Gideon at first pass seems to be humble. He said to them, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. At first pass, Gideon sounds really spiritual, right? Gideon says the right thing at the right time when he should have, but his actions don't match his words, right? As we look at his actions following this, the rest of chapter 8, in fact, the exact opposite becomes true because Gideon begins to act like a king, even though he's saying, I don't want to be king, because we know from our law that only God can be our king. He is our one true king, right? That's what separates us from all other nations and makes Israel unique. In verse 24, and Gideon said to them, let me make a request of you. All right, this is how his actions begin to deter from his words. Let me make one request of you. Every one of you, give me the earrings from his spoil. For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites, right? You remember the Ishmaelites? They were the ones, the traveling wonders who picked up Joseph on his journey, right? These were characters that wore lots of gold necklaces, gold earrings, gold little crescents on their ears. And so as they defeated these people, right, this people group, they gathered all the spoils, right, from them. And this is what Gideon is now asking for. He says, and they answered, we will willingly give them. And they spread a cloak, and every man threw it in the earrings of his spoil. And the weight of the golden earrings, verse 26 says what? That they requested was 1,700 shekels of gold. Besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and besides the collars that were around the necks of their camels. And Gideon, we'll get to that here in a moment, he's going to do something even crazier. But what we see here is that he takes the spoils for war. In other words, he's saying, hey, I want you to bring your goods here. It's time for you to essentially pay up for everything I've done for you. Right? It's time to pay up. He doesn't move with humility, and when he doesn't, it begins to corrupt his soul. Now, for all intents and purposes, right, what we see here is that he becomes king. He sets himself up as king. And he's the worst kind, because what Gideon is doing, he's feigning humility on the outside, but all the while he's seeking fame and power and wealth for himself. Oh no, I don't want to be king, but give it to me, right? I don't know if you ever find yourself in that place, right? He has all the signs of being a king. Great wealth. He has many wives. He's going to go on to have 70 sons, it says. Hello? That's a lot of work. Hello? Just right there. He has concubines. And then he names his son Abimelech. You know the meaning of Abimelech? It means my father is king. Hello? Right? I mean, it's kind of interesting. Oh, I don't want to be king, but oh yeah, by the way, my son is Abimelech. My father is king. Now, here's the deal. I think we all have to be careful. I think we all have to be careful, you know, and check our pride, check our motivations, because I think we all want to rule. I mean, if we're honest, we all want to be king. We all want to be queen. We all want to be on top at some point in our life. When God gives us success, we have to be careful, whether it's in our organization, whether it's in our family, whether it's in our relationships, whether it's in the church. I love what Abraham Lincoln once said. Abraham said this. He says, nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test his character, give him power. Right? Think about that. It's with power that you begin to learn about people's character. But in adversity, hey, most folks are solid. This is what we don't see in Gideon's life at this point. Now, here's the point I want to make about something you know and about someone you know very well. I think Jesus Christ, okay, used his power in a way that honored other people even when he had none, right? Jesus does what? He used his power for those who had none in their lives. Think about Mark chapter 9, verse 35. Jesus called the 12 and he says, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all. Galatians 5:13, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge in the flesh, but rather do what? Serve one another humbly and love. And this is what I think. When success and pride are brought together, it can be very dangerous. And we got to be paying attention. We got to be vigilant about that. Now, here's the question. How many of you are experiencing success in your life right now? You're experiencing a good level, solid level of influence. Man, if you are, celebrate it, right? We want to commend you. Like, that's not a thing to shy away from, because we believe that we're all stewards at Crossroads. We're stewards of the gifts that God has given us, the relationships that he's given us. Everything comes from God. It belongs to God. He's distributed those gifts in our life. And as he gives us influence and he gives us success, the question becomes, why has God blessed you? Why has God given you this seat of influence? Why has God given you this place, this position, this season, put you and positioned you where you are. And the question becomes, how am I using that? How am I stewarding that? Am I pointing to my success? Am I pointing to my smarts, my intellect, my abilities, my network, my relationships, my skills? Or am I pointing back to God? This is what we look at when we look at the life of Gideon. The fourth point I would make this morning is that without truth, all right, religion can deify us. In other words, if we don't have truth and other people speaking truth into our lives, we have a tendency to set ourselves up as God. We have a tendency to put ourselves in the driver's seat, and Gideon has his sights on something else, right? Gideon has his sights on something else as we look at verse 27. Gideon wants to be a spiritual leader. He doesn't want to just be king. He wants to take over the role of the priest in Israel's life. Look at verse 27. Gideon made an ephod of it. So he takes all this gold and he makes this ephod. Now, an ephod was like this linen garment. It looked like a jumpsuit. It's what the priests wore. It's how they would go into the Holy of Holies. It's a spiritual garment. All of Israel would have recognized it as a spiritual garment. It's what the spiritual leader wore. He makes one of gold, and he puts it in the city in Ophrah, where he's from. And all Israel whored after it there. All right? Great word in the ESV. Right? They prostituted themselves after it, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. So Midian was subdued before the people of Israel, and they raised their heads no more, and the land had rest 40 years in the days of Gideon. Now, notice this. These folks are going to have 40 years of rest, but before he does that, Gideon props himself up. Now, did he make a golden altar? Did he wear this thing? We don't know. The text doesn't really tell us, but it was in such a place, it was such in a position in their family, in their home, and in their city that everybody just sort of gave their life to it. Right? They had forgotten that Yahweh had delivered them from the Midianites. Now they're worshiping this gold artifact and move right back in, if you read the rest of chapter 8, into Baal worship. 69 of Gideon's 70 sons are going to die. All right, Abimelech is going to be raised up and moved toward this kingship, toward this judgeship, toward this deliverer, and he's going to lead in a poor way, and they're going to go right back to where they were just a few years ago as we met Gideon. Right? And they begin to do the cycle again of the judges, where they have apathy and where they grow in their sin and their apathy. God begins to judge them, and here we go again. Right? Everyone complied. Everything became a snare. This ephod became a snare to them, and they began to bend the truth for their own convenience. Now, history, right, is filled with people, right? Filled with people who use their power to corrupt things around them. Anybody study Henry VIII? Right? Remember Henry VIII? All right. This guy was strongly Catholic. In fact, he was so strongly Catholic that he backed the Pope during the season where Martin Luther was nailing his theses to the door, right? And this was the story, and he was against Martin Luther. He became a huge defender of the faith. In fact, the Pope gave him a title called the Defender of the Faith title, all right? Pretty cool. And 10 years later, what happens, though, is that he breaks with the Catholic Church, and he goes with two Protestant leaders during that time because now he wants a divorce from his wife, Catherine, right? Catherine is no longer useful to him, and he switches religions because he wants to marry another gal by the name of Anne, okay? All in the name of love, all right? I'm rejecting Jesus and the Pope, and I'm moving over here to what benefits me, all right? We've seen this many times. Now, here's the interesting. These two Protestant leaders, all right, that he's come up under, he convinces them to behead Catherine, all right? How does he behead Catherine? He beheads Catherine because they accuse her of being adulterous and incestuous, okay? Which all of history says that was not the case, okay? But he switches religions to do that. In other words, what we see is here's a person of power in religion using religion to get their way. And this is what happens when we place ourselves above the truth. When we place ourselves above the truth, we have to put to death anything that's idolatrous in our life, or we move down that slippery slope. Now, here's what I want you to remember about Gideon. Remember when Gideon a couple chapters ago was desperate to hear from God? Remember when he was going, God, man, I'm not sure. I want to step where you say step. And in fact, man, I'm going to put out the fleece and I'm going to figure out if you're talking to me and what you're saying. And I want to be in step with you. I want to obey you. I'm listening, right? I believe that Gideon was far better off before he experienced success of the victory with the 300. Because once he has the success, man, he moves in an arrogant way that begins to make things about him. It was Andrew Bonar who said this, let us be watchful after the victory as before the battle. And men, women, I don't know if you're experiencing success or failure right now. I don't know if it's up and to the right or if it's difficult. My words to you today would be to cling to Christ. To cling to the hope of the gospel and be reminded that it's our pride that leads us to destruction. But in our humility, if we say, hey, God, I'm just declaring my dependence upon you, my weakness actually becomes a strength, right? If dependence on God is our goal, then weakness actually becomes our strength. And may we not be like Gideon, who was supposed to be this righteous leader, and we become idolatrous, but may we cling to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And here's the good news, right? Here's the hope for you and I. Right, the gospel of Jesus should be informing in both of our successes and our failures. That our strength and our hope comes in a relationship with Jesus Christ. That he is our joy, that he is our completeness, that he is our satisfaction, even in the midst of hardship. And so with that this morning, God, we give you praise for the life of Gideon. We thank you that here was a man that was not perfect, and yet you used him to deliver a nation. God, may we take the positive things of Gideon's life. May we declare dependence upon you. May we trust you. May we move towards you. May we know that you are absolutely in charge and in control, that you desire to bless us and work through us. But God, at the same time, may we look at the failure of Gideon's life and see that his arrogance and his pride moved him to a place where he said, I want to be king. Father, I pray for the places in our lives where we say we want to be king, that you would destroy those ephods in our life. That we could tear down those Baal altars in our own life and recognize that you are the one true God. That we would declare that not only with our voices and our actions, but our very lives. To say, God, you are king, that you are better, Jesus, than anything or anyone. We love you, God. We trust you in the powerful and the saving and the beautiful name of Jesus today. Amen. Well, church family, what a joy to be with you this morning and worship. We're going to take these moments to respond just in these last minutes of the day, to sing, to declare his greatness. It's an opportunity for us to give. It's an opportunity for us to share prayer requests and sign up for next opportunities as our guest services team comes with baskets. And then lastly, around the room, there are communion tables. We encourage you this morning just to celebrate the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus, that he is our King, that he is our hope, that he is our joy, and that one day he is returning again to make all things new. But until then, we press in and continue to celebrate his grace and his mercy in our life. Let's respond.
Darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. Great are you, Lord.
Well, church family, what a joy to be with you this day. So grateful for you. Happy Thanksgiving this week. Hopefully you eat enough tryptophan to move you to naps and all those fun things, right? How many of you are turkey people? Come on. Ham people? Yes, okay, we got both. More turkey there. I love that. What's your favorite side? Go ahead and give it to me. Somebody. Mashed potatoes. All right. Anybody? Green bean casserole. All right. Anybody? That's it? Cranberry what? Ice. Okay, I love it. Sounds good. All right. Well, hey, hope you guys have a great week. I want to remind you in your conversations over the break, be grateful. Looking forward to being back next Sunday as well on Express Gratitude as we talk about that. But as we move into the holiday, remember there are great ways here to serve those in our community. Grab some trees off the board on the back to serve those single moms. Cameron Schaefer, thanks for leading us this morning, and band, so grateful for you guys. Yeah, super grateful. You guys have a blessed day. We'll see you next week as you be the church.